Steve Kornacki just drew a very stark line showing the support for Donald Trump lining up with his indictments.
Well, first of all, I'd say, Mika, that you guys talked this earlier about the big winners and big losers here. Big winner, obviously, Donald Trump here. All the way into the afternoon yesterday, the Trump campaign had been a little nervous over the course of the last few days leading into the caucuses. They, had set expectations. They were going to clear 50%. Their late polling showed them not making those expectations. They started worrying about the weather and the first-time caucus goers they were trying to get out there. And there was a little, the whole attack Vivek Ramaswamy thing was a sort of a tell that they were starting to get a little worried that not that Trump wasn't going to win, but that they weren't going to be able to get over 50%, which was really a key indicator for them. They obviously got that done last night and kind of surpassed their own expectations in some way internally. So a big win, obviously, for Donald Trump. The big loss here, as you guys said, I think really is for anybody who hopes to stop Donald Trump from being the nominee. And I think, you really have to look, we got very fixated on this, who's going to win second place, particularly because there was a chance if Nikki Haley had won second place, clearly that she would have, DeSantis would have had to drop out. She would have had Trump one-on-one, which everyone understands is like if there's going to be a way to beat Trump, it's going to be to get him one-on-one. Now we're not going to have him one-on-one. Both of these candidates, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, they're both going to argue they got the second ticket out of Iowa. DeSantis, I came in second. Haley says, I can win New Hampshire. Bottom line is they both got creamed here. They both lost by 30-plus points. No one here has ever won an Iowa caucus, and the Republicans died by more than 12 until last night. So both of these candidates walk out of here weakened and hobbled. If you had to say who has the path, Nikki Haley last night kind of claimed that it was her. I think, although it's kind of in some level illogical to say that you came in third and you're the one with the ticket out of Iowa, you're the one with the path. The truth is, as David Plouffe pointed out on our air last night, in these races, you got to win something at some point. And it's that simple. Forget about what happens after New Hampshire. The bottom line is, of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, the one who has a chance to win a primary in the foreseeable future is Nikki Haley. She doesn't have a great chance against Donald Trump, but she comes out of here with enough of momentum and enough funds, enough dollars on hand that she can win. You can say whatever you want about the New Hampshire primary and how it's different from the rest of the Republican electorate. It's true, but you still, if you're going to beat Donald Trump, you're going to have to beat him somewhere first. And Nikki Haley has a chance to do that, a chance in New Hampshire. And I think that's the ultimate story here. And what happens after that is tomorrow's problem. Right now, you've got a New Hampshire race coming up, and Nikki Haley is the only person in the Republican Party right now who has a chance to win a race against Donald Trump. And so even though she finished in a little disappointing fashion last night, she can make that argument. I think it's right.
Right. You spent a lot of time, John, in Iowa, of course, over this past weekend, but you've been to Iowa an awful lot over the past 20 years. I'm curious, what was your big takeaway this weekend on Donald Trump and his lasting power and the Republican Party, not just in Iowa, but how they represent larger forces as well as the movement? I think people Democrats who say, we have a candidate, Trump has a movement. They probably see that more in Iowa and states like that than anywhere else. What was your big takeaway this weekend?
Well, number one, and I know it's not always popular to speak well of Donald Trump, and I'm not going to speak well of himself, but of Donald Trump himself. But Donald Trump has if you remember, Joe, 2016, the Trump campaign was a joke. It was not a serious thing, and there's a lot of people who say if they'd had a reasonable campaign and a reasonable operation here, they should have won that race. They had come into caucus night with leading in the polls, and then Ted Cruz, better organized, better campaign, more harnessed the evangelical movement, and Ted Cruz was able to steal Iowa from them. The difference to 2024 and 2016 on the Trump campaign is night and day. The campaign itself is now a professional operation. The story of Trump being able to actually organized in the caucuses, something he didn't do in 2016, his ability to turn people out, his ability to dominate the evangelical vote, which he never did in 2016. Those are signs that Not that Trump is any more popular or that he's any less toxic or that he doesn't have any of the problems that you point out all the time. We all point out that he has in a general election. But the one advantage he showed here that I think he's going to carry forward is that now has an actual professional campaign operation around him. The fact that they were able to get to 51 and the fact that they did it on a night that was 5 below zero with a -30 wind chill. People were saying coming into the caucus night last night that they were going to have a record low attendance. You would have had to be below 100,000, I think, below like the previous low ever here was 89 or 98,000. I can't remember which. People thought they were going to make it last night. They made it over 100. The turnout was still low, but the Trump people got their people out last night. And that is a sign that this is a team that's more organized and more professional. I do think you're obviously right. This is a very, it's not an outlier state exactly because the dynamics in this state are very similar across the South. I mean, the results that Trump racked up last night here, he's going to be able to replicate across large swaths of the Sun Belt, large parts of the Deep South, large parts of the Mountain West. So Iowa is definitely not a reflection of the general election in America. It's not going to be a swing state. In 2024. It's not going to be Georgia or Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona even, but it is, in terms of the Republican Party, it is actually pretty representative of what gives Trump so much strength going forward into the rest of this nomination fight. This state does look a lot like the stronghold that Trump has, the bulwark he has against anybody, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, anybody else. This state is representative of the way in which Trump has transformed the Republican Party into the MAGA Party.
One other note, Vivek Ramaswamy finished way back in fourth place, dropped out of the race, and predictably, despite the fact he was attacked for the last several days by Donald Trump, endorsed Donald Trump. So, Jonathan Lemire, this effectively, if you look at the polling, was the outcome we predicted in terms of a margin, in terms of the dominance of Donald Trump. What maybe wasn't exactly predicted was how close DeSantis and Haley would be, leaving them both in the race to continue to split the vote in favor of Donald Trump.
So that's the best possible outcome for Donald Trump. Not only does he put up an impressive win, and yes, all the caveats that Heinlein just mentioned, it's still a pretty low turnout. It's a small percentage of the Republican vote in a very, very white state that doesn't tell us much about November 2024. But it does tell us about the Republican primary process right now. Trump gets the win he wants. His ground game was impressive. And both DeSantis and Haley can claim that they're still alive. And as long as they're out there splitting the vote, and even because New Hampshire is so important, and I think clearly Haley has a shot to win New Hampshire. I'd not say a great shot, but has a shot. But even if DeSantis hangs around and puts up 6, 7, 8, 10 points, if some of that would have gone to Haley, maybe that's the difference. Ramaswamy also are on the margins. He wasn't putting up much in New Hampshire, but if it's just 2, 3, 4 points, they go to Trump. If Trump wins New Hampshire, sort of by any margin, it's going to be hard for Haley, who I know is heading into her home state. And yes, there's a few weeks between New Hampshire and South Carolina, but she's down 30, 40 points in her home state, and that would be a difficult act to pull off. But I think the biggest lesson here, the most honest moment from Ron DeSantis, perhaps, in his entire campaign was a few days ago, where he acknowledged that the thing that changed the course of the race were the indictments. And Steve walked us through it on the board yesterday. And that's that was the moment Republicans came home to Trump. And I think that the second guessing that DeSantis, and I'm sure the Haley camp is having now as well, as certainly those of the campaigns that belong to Mike Pence or to Tim Scott, is there was a moment to have gone on the attack. And they didn't. Had they gone out after Trump right at the beginning of the campaign, instead of being so fearful of losing his support, maybe the trajectory of the race could have changed. But they held their fire. Trump only grew stronger. Yes, and then at this point, outside of Chris Christie, who, of course, did attack him and then had to drop out, they all largely kept their mouth shut, and they didn't go after Trump. And Trump was able to dominate the field, and we saw this resounding victory. And let's be clear, long way to go, but it's his nomination to lose. Clearly.
And not only did they not go after 100%. Him, in many ways, they defended him.
They rallied around him.
The Justice Department's being weaponized by the Biden administration against Donald Trump. They rallied around him at a time they could have criticized him. So, Joe and Mika, if you look ahead, as we just said, a week from today is New Hampshire. All eyes there. Then you go into Nevada, where Donald Trump is expected to roll. And then you've got that big gap, not until February the 24th. A lot of time before South Carolina, where that could be, if Donald Trump runs the way he's polling right now and finishes that way, that could be decisive, could be ball game.